In this video, we're gonna find out what is the best laptop for programmers. The first thing we'll do is discuss what are the features, as in what are the specs that you need to look out for in your programming laptop. Secondly, we will discuss operating system, aka the everlasting Windows versus macOS versus Linux debate. And based on all of this information, I will tell you precisely the laptop that I would personally choose if I was starting out learning to code today. Because even though the laptop that I use is this ridiculously expensive M1 Max Macbook Pro, this is not actually what I'd recommend for most people. Okay, so what do we need? In terms of specs, the first thing you need to look out for is to get a screen with at least full HD resolutions and a size of 13 inches. Most people think that the higher quality screen is just a quality of life thing, and while it is that too, what a higher resolution screen means is that you have a lot more screen real estate for multitasking and to generally see a lot more on your screen because the pixels are smaller, which means that you can fit more information on the screen at once. When your resolution is lower, like in most budget laptops, things on your screen actually show up larger, as there's simply not enough pixels on your screen to show all of that information. Also, another thing with this laptop is that the text isn't sharp enough for you to have a pleasant reading experience. That's why at least Full HD is an absolute must. I actually have slightly below 4K resolution, which yes is overkill, but that coupled with the 16-inch display gives me so much screen real estate. It just makes using the thing an extremely pleasant experience. I'm more likely to want to start coding because I have this image in my head of the process of it being extremely pleasant and pleasurable rather than really annoying and having to look at some like really pixelated screen. And as a bonus tip, make sure your display has good viewing angles because you do not want to have your laptop display doubling as a mirror. Second is the processor. The CPU is usually the part that mostly determines the price of your computer, as it is the heart of the computer that does most of the heavy lifting. But luckily, unless you go for some very heavy machine learning work, most coding is not actually that demanding on your computer, so you don't need to bust out for the most high-end processor like I have done. But you also absolutely shouldn't go for the cheapest option out there, because as someone who used to run this 7-year-old MacBook Pro with a literal potato running inside of it, it's not a fun experience, let me tell you that. So again, while my MacBook is absolute overkill, the fact that the processor is so fast, I never have to worry about lag. In fact, I've forgotten what lag even feels like. So that just again means that the process of coding and the process of whatever I do on my computer is so nice that I'm more likely to want to start doing it even when I don't feel like it, because I just have the image in my head of the process being really nice and smooth. If you can afford it, all of these new Apple M1 MacBooks give the absolute best value for money. There's been a bunch of benchmark tests against a lot of the old Intel and AMD models, and these ones for the price absolutely smoke all of the other models and all of the Windows options. There's a lot of technical reasons why the M1 processors are so efficient, even though based on like raw numbers, they might not seem fast, but because they're built on the same chip and they're so efficient, they just run a lot more efficiently and a lot faster. But the cheapest one does start at like $1,000 or maybe $800 used. So if you don't want to spend that much, generally a nice Intel Core i5 or i7 with a frequency of at least 3 GHz should be sufficient for most people. Third is RAM. And this one is pretty simple, so I'm not going to waste too much of your time. Get at least 8 GB of RAM, ideally 16. If you don't know what RAM is basically your computer's short-term memory. You know when you're shopping in a grocery store, but you don't have a shopping list, but you just have sort of in your mind the things that you want to buy? That's sort of what RAM is for computers. And this is separate from long-term storage, which we're going to talk about later. But RAM is critically important, especially when you're coding and running any complicated programs, because there's a lot of short-term variables and all this kind of stuff that needs to be stored in order for your program to actually function. I think this one that I used to code with, this really old 2013 something MacBook, has like 4 GB, and I was able to code, but it was not very pleasant. But I did code my first ever Hello World programs with this thing, so I guess it can be done. 16 GB should not be needed for most coding tasks, but I would always recommend people to get slightly more than they need, because programs become more complicated all the time, which means that they become more RAM heavy all the time and require a lot more memory. So the more memory you have, the longer your laptop will last before you eventually start feeling like you wish you had more. But no, as things stand now, if you don't have the money, you can go with 8 gigabytes unless you're going for some really heavy, I think either machine learning, or I've heard that mobile development is also pretty RAM heavy. But if you want to get a job as a software developer, you obviously need the right skills. As you get the right skills, you need the right education. That is why I want to briefly tell you about the Caltech Coding Bootcamp by today's sponsor, SimpliLearn. SimpliLearn is one of the world's leading certification providers. They've helped over 3 million professionals and companies to get trained, acquire certifications, and upskill their employees. The Caltech Coding Bootcamp, offered in collaboration with SimpliLearn, has been the highest rated coding bootcamp by many different reviewers. You also get credits and a certificate from Caltech for completing it. You also get access to Caltech's Circle membership, one-to-one resume sessions, and access to more than 3 million jobs via their network. You can see that it covers the basics of many different frameworks, which is a really big plus for me, because I'm pretty sure most bootcamps only focus on like one specific one, so that when you complete it, you'll actually be qualified to apply for many different roles rather than just one. Their advisors are also extremely well regarded in the industry, and as for the fees, you can opt for either pay all in full or a monthly installment payment schedule. So if you do want to take the bootcamp path to learn to code, this is definitely one of the best options. So if you're interested, there's going to be a link down below in the first line of the description for you to check it out. Thank you for SimpliLearn for sponsoring this video, and now back to the video. Fourth is storage. Now, first, absolutely get a laptop with at least one SSD. Do not try to code with a laptop with just one of those old wank HDDs. It'll just make opening your programs a complete pain. It takes such a long time, and it slows down your process so much. As for the size, obviously the bigger the better. I think the minimum that, for example, this M1 things ships with is like 128 gigabytes, which is fine, but when I was using this in the past, I was definitely always running out of space. So that's why I recommend at least 256 gigabytes for your SSD. If you go any smaller, you're going to have to be deleting files all the time, and you're going to have to be thinking, oh, do I keep these pictures that I took with Mary, or do I delete my code files from CS50? Because you do not have space to store all of those. If you then need more storage in the future, you can always just buy an external one, either an external SSD or even an external HDD, which is what I have for a lot of my long-term storage for stuff that you don't need to open up in a regular basis. I have 1 terabyte on this one, and even that one seems to fill up quite fast, although most of that is because these video files are so big. Freaking Final Cut Pro balloon project sizes. Lastly, the good old Windows versus Mac OS versus Linux debate. Basically, just don't code on Windows. No one codes on Windows. Either get a Mac if you want to become a part of the higher class, or if you have some peasant Windows laptop, most people just download the Linux operating system and do all their programming on that one. And the reason for that is that macOS and Linux are based on the Unix system, which is a lot more developer friendly because the command lines are a lot better. I think the security is better, and there's a lot of reasons why essentially Windows is just not in fashion in the programming community, which also leads to the fact that when you're looking up for tutorials, like all of my tutorials, for example, they're all based on either Mac or Linux. Whereas because no one codes on Windows, you will struggle to find tutorials for Windows. And yes, you can always Google how to do the same thing in Windows, but that just always adds extra work for you to figure out how to do the same thing in Windows. And I've heard that doing all of these things in Windows is always just a lot more complicated anyway. And that's also another reason why no one codes on Windows. For jokes aside, of course, you can probably do anything on Windows as well. You can use any operating system you prefer. Also, I just really personally dislike Windows in general. That's just a subjective thing. I used to have a big Windows PC, but I did end up selling it, and now I exclusively use this MacBook Pro. But yeah, you can definitely get away with coding on any system as long as it's not Windows. I'm kidding. Don't code on Windows. So based on all of these, my absolute most value recommendation is actually this M1 MacBook Air. This is a laptop that I used for most of my own coding journey, but this one is just absolutely fantastic. As I said, the M1 processor is absolutely insane. If your budget is around the $800, $900 to $1,000 range, you really can't get any better than this. If you want to be a peasant and go for one of those Windows options, that's fine, but I don't really have specific recommendations for those, but just look at the spec recommendations that I laid out and I'm sure you'll find a good option. In general, the way I think about buying a computer is that I always invest in a slightly better one that I'll need right now for future proofing. No, that is not the reason why I spent $3,500 on this one. Literally the only reason why I went for this ridiculous beast is for video editing purposes. Now that I make a substantial money out of these videos as well, it just made sense for me to get the best laptop out there for those purposes. Honestly, I would still be coding on this laptop had I not had the need for a bigger screen, a better screen, a faster processor for video editing purposes. A computer is the one thing where you should invest a lot of money, because let's face it, like if you're programming, and even if you're not, like whatever you're doing, you're probably sitting on your computer every single day anyway. When you think about it on a per day basis or even a per hour basis, how much time I spent on this every single day, both editing video and programming, like it's not that bad actually. Lastly, I just want to give a very shameless plug to my Instagram. I've been posting there a lot more recently, and I've recently also moved to London. So if you want to see what life in London is like as a self-taught software developer, because my full-time job is finally starting in a couple of weeks, make sure to follow me on Instagram. The handle is down below and the link is in the description. And a funny story about this one actually, I had to fly all the way to France to buy it. It's a very long story, but I actually vlogged the whole thing and I made a video about it on the channel, so check out this video if you want to know what the hell I'm talking about. But with that, let's all keep coding and enjoying the journey along the way. I will see you next time.